I'm so used to saying good evening. Good afternoon. Kirsten Lennon, Financial Services Director, and today we are on part 2 of the budget update. We plan on presenting today on mostly general fund and capital in the general fund, and then tomorrow we'll be here at 9 a.m. to talk more about the enterprise funds and the special revenue funds. And hopefully, unless we get through all of it today, but I am going to drag out and ask you to ask questions and make sure that we're digging in as deep as you want to make sure that you have a complete understanding of what's in this current proposed budget. So we left off yesterday with this slide that had some typos, and I fixed the typos so that we now say department head instead of debt head, but debt head is kind of funny. Gave us all a little chuckle, right? Mm-hmm. And as I said yesterday, the current proposed total budget for the city for fiscal year 2027 would be $151,920,655. This is a decrease from the budget that was adopted in July of last year for the final budget of $177,885,373. I did a little better at rounding this year, so I have a whole number instead of a 3, which you will have to talk to everyone on staff. I hate it when people don't round. It bugs me. It's so much easier to deal with whole numbers. But we also plan on ending the fiscal year 26 lower than the budget at $153,352,235, which kind of makes the 26 budget and 27 budget pretty similar in alignment of what we are going to spend. So, day 2. So I'm going to start off with fund balance and reserves. This is something that we talk about every year. How do we budget our reserves? What is our fund balance? The fund balance you get from the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. It is the carryover for the general fund or whatever fund you are looking at, and it gives you what that fund balance is. Fund balance is not cash in the bank. Fund balance is cash and cash equivalents, which a cash equivalent would be something that you could liquidate quickly, not something that is, permanent, but easily liquidated. So our fund balance for fiscal year 25 ending was $33,805,855 for fiscal year 2025. And so then you carry that number over into 26, and that fund balance gets budgeted as a revenue. And then you put all your expenses towards all your revenues, all your fund balance, and then the remaining amount that is left gets carried over to the next year as the fund balance for the budget for fiscal year 27. When we were creating the 26 budget, there was a lot of discussion about using our fund balance and not having too much in reserve. So in the fiscal year 26 budget, we did anticipate spending down quite a bit of the fund balance to do things like Main Street. Main Street was a $13 million project, and so most of that money came from the general fund transferred into HERF. So that's what a transfer in is, so we'll get to that again in a minute. But that was the plan, to spend down our fund balance and not have such a high fund balance and move into the next year using some of those reserves and those fund balance to cover expenditures. So every fund, not every fund, has a fund balance, but the larger funds have fund balance that get carried over from year to year, and typically we budget to spend them down in every fund except for the general fund. And then we usually keep a balance for a reserve in the general fund so that we know we have a carryover for the next year. I'm going to stop for a second and let you think about that, and if you have any questions on that before I move on. Okay. So, reserves. Reserves are what we budget as an expense in the council's budget. We have a few line items that we consider as a reserve. We have the regular budget reserve, which we are not to spend. That is really just us preparing for if we didn't take enough revenues or the economy dropped or something happened and we would need some revenues to cover expenditures, we set aside this reserve. In the past, we had been doing for a very long time the recommended amount, which is 16.67% of the prior year's ongoing revenues. What is an ongoing revenue? It's not grant funding. It's not something that's a one-time revenue source. It's things that continue on, fees for service, sales tax, those types of things. So the last few years, we had been doing 25% of that revenue. And then this year, during budget discussions between the city manager and myself, we decided to increase that to 35% of the ongoing revenues, just to have a larger reserve, a larger, like the state calls it, their rainy day fund, and to make sure that we have enough in reserve to cover any ongoing thing that may occur.
So,
yes.
just try to take it, a step deeper.
Okay.
I may have asked this question last year, so hopefully this is being recorded for when I ask the same question next year.
It is being recorded.
Okay, good. Then you can just play back the answer. So the budget reserves are funded out of different funds, not like just the general fund.
No. This budget reserve is just the general fund.
Just the general?
Yes.
So 25, potentially 33% of the general fund.
Yes.
So there's an increase, we're looking at an 8% increase potentially in the budget reserves.
Yes.
So that's money that otherwise would have been going to, that 8% difference is potentially money that would be going to something else or taking from somewhere else. How is that?
So
how would you explain it to me as a fifth grader?
It's not really it would have gone towards other expenses. So also since the general fund funds all the other special revenue funds. So if a special revenue fund, which is streets, library, airport,
Right.
Cemetery, all those, if they do not create their own, enough revenues to cover their expenditures, the general fund transfers those funds
Right.
to those other special revenue funds to
Right.
cover their expenditures. So basically, by increasing this, we are saying we're not transferring that money to any other fund in this year. We're going to save it and make sure that we have a good, solid reserve balance to move forward. Since this reserve, even though it's only for the general fund, would then cover expenditures in the other funds if they were needed. So even though the reserve is only 35%
Okay.
of the general fund pays for all those other funds if they need the revenue. So this would also be a reserve for all the special revenue funds as well if they were to need further sources.
So is there a higher level of justification that the special revenue fund, or that the special revenue funds would need to get that reserve money? I mean,
It really is that we need to maintain a high reserve in case of an emergency where we didn't bring in the revenues.
Right.
And we need to fund those other funds. They have ongoing operational expenses too.
Right.
And we do not have any other reserve for those funds.
okay, so they'll have to be more careful, they'll have to be more careful with their expenses.
Yes.
Okay,
And I know, I'm a saver. I will tell you, as a finance person, I am all about the reserves and having a good, solid base to be able to support your ongoing expenses. And so, of course, raising this to 35% really makes me happy. It does affect what you can spend in that current budget year, but we are reducing our fund balance by everything but this reserve for this next year
Okay.
in our budget. So as you see on this slide, I'm saying in '26, we are coming into '26, and we will not have an increase or decrease in our fund balance in '27, because the only part of our fund balance that will be there is this reserve.
Yeah, so what does Series 1 and Series 2 mean in that graph?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know why it doesn't have a label. One column, the column, not the actual area, is got to be the reserve. Yes, it's the carryover. The columns are carryover. The area is fund balance. Next time I'll have to make sure that those labels carry over, so it tells you what it is.
Okay,
So the column so for example, in 2027, the column, up and down green column, is what we plan on doing for is the fund balance that we will have at the end of the year. And the area, the blue in the background, is the reserve. So you see how in '27, they're the same dollar value.
and what does that mean?
That means that I am anticipating that our fund balance carryover at the end of '27 will only be our reserves of 14 million. Whereas this year, when we came into the year, our fund balance carryover from '25 was 30 million. We're going to be spending down our fund balance.
Council, if I can chime in here just a little bit. So Kirsten and I had that conversation. We're required by law to bring you folks a balanced budget. The 25% and 10% general fund reserve and emergency reserve are our recommendations moving forward. And the reason for that is, one, it's very transparent. You don't have money here, undesignated here, that sort of thing. It's simply a general fund reserve and an emergency reserve. I had the fortune or misfortune of going through the '07-08 recession, and in a city that had a 35% reserve, and by the time we came out of that, we had less than $2 million in reserve. And so because of that, I remember that. But also, if you look at that chart in fiscal year 2021, we have a budget reserve of $3.5 million. That's very similar to the amount that we discussed earlier this year when they were talking about eliminate the food tax. And so if we're under those constant threats, a simple act like that at the state level could greatly reduce our budget, and then we have no reserves. And so if council is supportive of that, that allows us to have that cushion so we can weather any downturn. You can turn on the TV at any given time and you hear about the oil prices and everything else and all the threats that we face from an economic perspective. And this allows us to have that security so that should we have that strong economic downturn, we don't have to lay off employees, we don't have to reduce services, and we can weather those storms with sometimes just keeping positions vacant and that sort of thing without having to take dramatic measures. And it gives us, Kirsten and I, that level of comfort that we can weather those things and still provide the level of service that our community needs.
I know when you go, I know you have an employee budget meeting,
Yes.
right, where you present these things. I think it's important that they know that we're essentially saving money for them, right? So that they understand that. Because sometimes they don't understand the full, like, hey, we're saving this, yeah, but it's so that if you're here and we have a bad day, we can make sure that we don't have to lay you off, right? So just a thought, because sometimes it doesn't go through their, why are you saving all this money?
Yeah, and there are lots of levels to that too, when you start talking about employee benefits and how those things don't, just because there's an economic downturn, Arizona State Retirement doesn't call up and say, that's okay, you don't have to pay us this month. And Kairos doesn't say, oh gee, that's okay, we'll take care of your medical expenses. They stayed the same, but the income level has dropped off.
Any more questions about this slide or this fund balance versus reserves versus? I'm all about saving for the rainy day. As a finance person, we are about, budgeting and saving and making sure that there's funds to cover those expenses. The reason that we could do the Main Street project and just pay for it out of our reserves was because we did these types of reserves for many years and built up that fund balance to be able to cover the cost of doing that road. I know when we have worked with Stiefel, they're a bonding company, they help with doing bonding. He came into town a couple weeks ago and he's like, I'm driving down this new road and I was thinking to myself, I hope the city didn't do that themselves, because he knows how expensive it is to do roads and how hard it is to basically save to be able to do those types of projects. And that is why you have a larger fund balance or a larger reserve. If the times are good and this reserve stays there, we could use those funds in the future to do a large project rather than bonding and taking on debt. Okay, now we're going to go into debt. So at the present time, at the end of fiscal year 27, we will have a total of $35 million of outstanding principal on our debt. That is 5 different, 2 WIFA loans and 3 bonds. The WIFA loans were done for the refunding of the MPC bonds that were used to purchase the water companies back in 2004 and 2005. You refund because you get a better interest rate, it saves you money. You can't refund for typically 10 years into a bond. At the present time, we have one outstanding debt, the 2016 pledged revenue, which its final payment will be on July 1st of 2027. So not in fiscal year 2027, but at the beginning of fiscal year 2028. Mm-hmm. It's exciting to pay off debt, but we also anticipate that we purchased a building for City Hall, and we will most likely have to bond to do any type of remodeling for that building. So, in other words, we're going to replace this debt with a new debt for that construction. Currently, the bond payment, obviously, if you look at the sheet, you can see that the 2016 bond payment was about, 2027 bond payment was about 1.3 million, 1.4 million. At the present interest rates, our debt service payment will probably be a little higher than that for the same $20 million borrowed. And Mario asked me if I could come up with a figure. I don't have a good figure, and so I don't want to. I would say probably closer to the $2 million mark than, that's just an estimate though.
Ms. Lennon,
Yes.
is this amount of debt for our type of city, is that pretty, across the board, do you think? Is that?
Yeah, it's not, we are not high on debt. We don't have a lot of debt, although I'm sure some people would argue with me, but we do not have a high amount of debt. We've only borrowed for things that were absolutely necessary to fund. That is why we fully funded the road, right? We didn't want to go into debt. We wanted to make sure we saved and fully funded repaving that road. I am not somebody who likes debt. Finance, you know, that's who I am. So I try to make sure that we are reserving funds accordingly to be able to, you know, pay as we go instead of bonding if we don't have to.
And the amount of our debt has declined over the last, we haven't taken on new debt, we've just been continuing to pay off those that are listed here. Isn't that true? Because I know a couple of years ago you mentioned that we had about 50 million in debt, and now we're looking at 35 million. So,
As you pay it down, I mean, you do pay on the principal annually. But we did add one bond in 2021, and that is a taxable bond that to pay the unfunded liability for the public safety retirement. That is
Right, that's
the
right.
most recent debt we have.
okay.
As long as the credit rating services like us, that's all.
We have an AA
Yeah.
credit rating, and it has maintained an AA for many years. Okay, transfers in and out. So, as I stated earlier, the general fund basically assists the special revenue funds to cover their expenditures. So that's what a transfer in or out is. So this is us transferring funds from the general fund to those funds to cover their expenditures. So you can see on this chart for 2024, 2025, the ending year of 26, and then again in 27, there is about $10 million that went to HERF. And HERF is the streets, and that was so that we could pave Main Street. We started transferring those funds in 25, even though we did not start the project in 25. We just wanted them to have the reserve to be able to fund the road if it was to get going. So that is why that one is as large as it is. And then the library is one of the other large transfers that we always have. The library brings in very little revenue of its own. Yavapai County does fund a very small portion of the library budget. Next year. Yeah, it went up a little bit. It's supposed to be like $130,000 this next year of the $1 million budget. So over $1 million budget. So that there's always a transfer from the general fund to the library to cover operations at the library. We also have to transfer out to the cemetery because you want to talk about not making money. The cemetery makes no money. Most of the plots have been sold many, many, many years ago, many moons ago. And really the only thing that the cemetery brings in is if we have a burial, we charge them to dig the hole. So any other costs at the cemetery are covered by the general fund beyond the $400 or $500, maybe $600 that they bring in annually.
Can we go back just a second for the
Yep.
library? Do we know what the percentage of out-of-city users is compared to the in-city? Is there any way to
Come
capture
on
that?
up. Come on up, Jack.
I'm just curious, because
Come on down. The price is right.
Good evening, Mayor, Councilmember Dow. Yes, there is a way. No, it is not easy. What I can say is because we are part of the Yavapai Library Network and we do receive the funding from the county as part of the Yavapai County Free Library District, it is mandatory that we offer services to all county residents. And so that's one of the reasons we don't closely track it. We could do it based on their library cards, but it would be a significant amount of work to go through that process.
yeah, I don't think, in my opinion, it should be restricted just to Cottonwood. But but I'd like to, if we had a number, we could at least go to Yavapai County and be like,
So I spent the better part of 2 years complaining and campaigning with the county to restore a lot of our funding for the library. It used to be in the 190,000 range and slowly ticked away. And so this current Board of Supervisors has been very willing to work with us. Lots of county supervisor meeting, lots of letters and meetings and everything else, and it's slowly coming back up. So 2 years in a row now, we've seen an uptick in that. And this current Board of Supervisors has committed that there won't be decreases, and they'll continue to try to increase that back to where it was.
The 130,000, that's $26, $27?
Yes.
Okay.
if they do reduce it, can we revoke their library cards?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dow, we could do whatever the council would like us to do. It wouldn't be staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay. And then,
Jack, you can't have that book.
the airport also requires some transfers in from the general fund to cover its costs. It does produce quite a bit of its own revenue. It just depends on what grant projects, what other projects need to happen at the airport, and the dollar value that gets transferred. So you can see in this chart, you know, it ranges anywhere from $42,000 to $184,000. It just kind of depends on the year and how their fuel sales go and how everything else happens whatever else happens at the airport. So it fluctuates quite a bit. The other transfer outs we do too often is to the Capital Improvements Fund, which is Fund 30. And that's usually for things like purchasing buildings, or building bathrooms, or those large ticket items that we do throughout the city that really don't belong to any specific department, but are citywide capital improvements. And I typically only budget larger projects in the Capital Improvements Fund. We do allocate money to the Capital Improvements Fund every year as part of the sales tax allocation, just to have funds in there. And then you could use whatever reserves or carryover they have from that allocation to cover expenditures in that year. So that's transfers in and out. Does that explain? Okay. Okay, so now on to where does money go in the general fund? One of the main items that we always have to look at when we are getting ready to budget for the next fiscal year is what is it going to be, what are the rates going to be for Arizona State retirement and for public safety retirement? The majority of our employees are on Arizona State retirement. The only people who are on public safety retirement are sworn officers and firefighters. And that totals about 50 to 60 people of our total staffing that are in public safety retirement. So next year, the rates for Arizona State retirement are going down by 0.02%. I'm not sure anyone's going to notice because 0.02% is just really nothing. But basically the rate is 12% and the employee pays in 12% and then the city matches that 12%. The total cost for next year is anticipated to be almost 1.6 million for Arizona State retirement as our match. Public safety retirement, like I said, we have about 50 to 60 employees in public safety retirement. Their rates are slightly different. Basically, how public safety retirement works is it depends on what tier you're in. And when I say tier, it means it depends on when you were hired and when you went into the system. Tier 1 are people who were hired on or before 2011, I think. And their contributions will always be 7.65%. That is what they contribute. It's by state statute. It will never change. The amount the city contributes is based on whatever the unfunded liability is. You have to match it, and then it increases if your unfunded liability is higher than zero, basically. We did bond a few years ago to pay down the unfunded liability. And if you look at the chart for police and fire, you can see that police's rate is kind of creeping up. That's because their unfunded liability has grown slightly, and we probably need to start paying down some of that unfunded liability with the reserve that we bonded for. And I am thinking that I'm going to do that this year, and hopefully keep them down at the 100% level by the end of the year. So their rate for Tier 1 is 7.65% for the employee and 18.35% for the employer. Whereas fire is overfunded. They're 107% funded almost. So their rates are closer to the Arizona State retirement rate for the employer, 11.38%, employees 7.65%. Now Tier 2 is anyone after 2011, and they pay 7.65%, but the employer pays around 9 or 10%, and it's set at that, and it doesn't really grow much from that unless there's an unfunded liability. And then Tier 3, it is a 50-50 match unless you have an unfunded liability, and then we have to pay a little bit extra per employee to help with that unfunded liability. And you can see that in this chart, we anticipate that the contributions for Arizona, for public safety retirement for fiscal year 27 are about $862,000. And then the bond, the debt service is about 1.5 million for that year. And that 1.5 million is split between police and fire. That was a lot. And I listed out what the assets are in all those funds and what the liability is. The difference between Arizona State retirement and public safety retirement also is that when you're in Arizona State retirement, you're part of a big pool. Everybody's lumped together. This is our pension liability. It's $12.5 million for Arizona State retirement. Of the $15 billion that is the entire state. That's what those numbers are. Whereas when you're in public safety retirement, you are your own pool. Nobody else is in that pool with you, so whatever your unfunded, whatever your liability is, it's your liability as an entity.
Ms. Klein, can you explain what happened about a year ago or 2 years ago? Wasn't there something with laterals if they moved from one to the other?
So you take on, anytime you move someone who's in Tier 1 or Tier 2 to your department, you take on that liability. So it increases your liability. So if you're hiring people who are tenured, which really is not great for the police department or fire to say, well, we got to hire somebody who's new because they cost us less money. But if you've been in for 5 or 10 years and you're 10 years and you're in the Tier 1, your liability comes with you. So then it becomes the city's liability because we have to pay your retirement. And you only get the funds that have been contributed to that point. And so then the rest of the retirement, your retirement liability becomes the city's. So that is kind of why it's been adjusting. Also, if you have multiple disability retirements, it also increases your unfunded liability.
But
we've had a few.
what was the change that occurred? Didn't something happen where you held the liability until they retired or something, and now it just follows you?
It was quite a few years ago when they decided that everyone should report this liability on their own books instead of it being just at the public safety retirement. I can't remember what GASB proclamation that was. There's so many and they're so numbered, and it's like, how many ever years ago, we started having to report this as part of our annual financial report, which is when they determined that everybody should really work on paying down their unfunded liability for public safety retirement. And you can see in 2019, 2020, and 2021, our contributions were in the 1.7 million range.
Crazy.
Yeah, and so that was why we paid down our unfunded liability to try to get some savings over the next 20 years. And when we bonded, we will save money by paying down that unfunded liability, even though it seems high this year. It really does benefit us to save those funds, because we were headed in the 65 to 70% range. What does that mean? That means that the city pays 75% of your salary into the retirement. So for every officer that we had that was in Tier 1, we would have been paying 65 to 70% of on top of their salary out. So that was why we bonded, because now at least we're down in the 10 to 17 range and not in the 60 to 70% range.
I'm maybe having a hard time understanding how we were even, right? We bond, we're even, and now it's creeping back up, and the police liability.
I can tell you why
Unfunded goes back
fire's
up.
better than police.
Okay.
We used to have the volunteer fire retirement funds, and we, a few years ago, disbanded that program. We had no more retirees drawing from that, and so there was about $250,000, $300,000 that was in that fund for those retirees that you could apply to the unfunded liability for the fire department. So we did pay those funds in, and that helps them. And then they have had fewer people retire and fewer disability retirements over the life of us, the city, being in public safety retirement. That is why theirs is lower.
Okay, thank you.
In
The fun
short,
stuff.
Yeah, in short, the bond is a good thing. The rate that you have to pay for these pensions changes annually based on the actuarials, based on how well or poor the investments are doing on behalf of those agencies. And so they will adjust the rate of return. So when you bond, you tend to smooth out that kind of responsibility that we're going to have over time, but there still is some fluctuation of what's left because of the volatility of their investments. If they have an actuarial rate of return, and let's say it's set at 7%, and if they only receive 6%, then they're going to tack on that 1% that they didn't achieve to what you have to contribute to keep the fund solvent. And it was GASB 68, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did Google tell you?
I thought it was it, but it did confirm, and it was in 2014.
Yeah. Well, and at the time we bonded, we did not have the worst rates in the state of Arizona. There were other areas, other police departments and fire districts that were well over, some of them that were at like 100%. So they just basically matched to every employee into the retirement. Okay. Health insurance. There's another benefit that continuously goes up, no matter what you do. The city tries to maintain these benefits to attract employees. We offer a very good insurance package because it's a good benefit to provide. This year we saw a 12% increase over last year's rates. And we try not to 100% pass that on to the employees. We try to be pretty fair and make sure that we are still covering a good amount of the health insurance coverage. And as I'm sure everyone is aware, health insurance is ridiculous. it has gotten very high over the last few years, and so it's a good benefit to have. In fiscal year 26-27, we anticipate that we budget $5 million for health insurance premiums. And if you're looking at the chart below, you'll see that in 26, we budgeted 4.8 million, but we only anticipate we're going to spend 4.1 million. And that's just because you have people coming and going, and then people don't enroll in the higher cost plans, or there are other reasons that would cause it to go down below what we budgeted. We try to budget a little high just to make sure we're covered.
Which plan do employees get for themselves?
So, if you take any of the plans above the PPO 1200, the city pays for the employee 100%. So, from the PPO 1200 plan up, which would be all the high deductible ones, the city covers 100% of the employee's premium. The children and spouse and family plans go by a percentage. The city covers a percentage of each of those plans. But the employee cost for those 4 plans, we pay 100%.
Thank you.
See, I knew I could make this last 2 hours. Employee compensation. So I think you've all heard me say before that employee compensation is one of the highest expenses at the city. But we are a service-based business, basically. What we do is we provide a service to the citizens of Cottonwood. We are anticipating that in fiscal year 27, total cost for all departments will be $30.7 million for employee salary and benefits.
So why the difference in the 2025-26 budget number?
With the
is
department head,
so much high, or so much lower than the department head? Is it just because of salary savings from not
Yes.
filling positions?
It would be salary savings from not filling positions during the year, or not filling them at all. But yes, that would be why. You didn't fill all those positions to 100%.
And when it says employee compensation, that includes insurance?
Yes, this is-
That includes all of it?
Yes, this is all of the benefits, so
Okay.
salary and other employee-related expenses.
Got it.
Kirsten, for council and the audience, what is the average cost for benefits as a percentage of salary?
It's about 40%. So, this year, we had, I didn't count them. That's pretty funny. We had 10 requests for new employees, full-time staff, and one was a late request per council's recommendation, and the judge asked to add it. And we had a request to fund maybe some part-time intern-type programs from Human Resources, maybe to try to get people in at the entry-level college part-time, maybe while they're going to school or high school, to get them to want to come work for government. And then we had a couple requests, 4 requests to change just basically their ranges or their job classification. So that means that it changes where they fall in the salary scale. Of those, we budgeted 6, and 5 of them are only if they get grant funding. The transit program, as you are aware, is about 75% grant funded by ADOT. And so we requested in our grant application in March for the federal fiscal year, which begins in October, to increase the funds to allow for these positions. But if we do not get that award increased by that amount, we won't add the positions. That's why they say October, if grant funded, because that's when you would start receiving the increased federal allocation. The police officer, traffic enforcement officer, they also have applied for a GOHS grant. The GOHS grants are also federal grants, so that's why it says October. They plan on filling, they asked in their grant funding for 2 officers to be paid for, and they requested to have 1 additional officer added. So they plan on just allocating 1 of the current officers towards that program and then adding an officer. And then we budgeted the court security officer to let them have a full-time security guard. Oh, look, Amanda, I was wrong. I did 19.
On the security officer, I understand it says 82 is the annual cost, but what was the cost of the part-time that we were already paying?
Yes, I don't have that number on here. It's probably somewhere around the $20,000, $30,000 range.
Okay, so
Really, we're only adding about $50,000 to the budget.
so we're only adding basically
Yeah.
half a position technically?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And then we also said we would do 1 of the part-time requests for the intern program, maybe for the full year, and we could either do a high school or college level, whatever was needed, just to experiment, see how that program grows. We often have people who want to intern with the city, and it would be nice to be able to pay them and have them come work for us, kind of on a semi-full-time basis instead of an hour here and an hour there, but like maybe a 4-hour day for 2 days a week or so. And then we did change the ranges for the operations and maintenance specialist at the airport. And then we decreased the range for a position in utilities. And then we increased the range for a part-time court clerk to a court clerk 2. So those are in the budget.
Can I ask why we decreased the?
It was just determined, I think, at the time when they were looking at their positions that they didn't need the arsenic treatment specialist 2, and they would rather that person go be a equipment operator 1, and so we just transferred the position, basically.
Okay, so it wasn't reducing
No, a person.
a person, it was just transferring it to a
Yes.
less expensive position.
Yep,
Copy.
So I had a few questions.
yes.
One question is, how many positions in fiscal year 2026 were vacated and will not be filled, and what's the savings on that?
I do not have that number.
Because there
We
are,
can get that for you, but probably it would be tomorrow.
okay, but there are a few to several, would you guess?
I would say that we've had several come and go in the year. So yes, I would say 50 to 100 people have come and gone. I mean, we've had advertisements for quite a few positions in this last year. And then some of them aren't filled for a few months while you're hiring.
Oh, okay, so let me try to restate my question. How many positions will not be filled going forward? The person left the job and that
None.
position is not zero.
We don't plan on eliminating any positions except the city attorney position because he's contracted at this time. So in this past year, we had budgeted for this full-time city attorney because we weren't sure 100% if we were going to be contracted still or if we were going to hire an internal city attorney. But in the budget currently for next year, the only position that we are removing is the city attorney position.
Okay.
We are not funding the deputy city manager position because per discussions with Mario, he wants to go a different route rather than filling that position right away. So we're just not going to fund it.
Okay.
We did, we did have some that we left vacant and then reclassified, but we did not go down on any allocated positions.
Okay.
And so we'll get you that information tomorrow on what those changes were and what the savings was.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, that's down the line a few slides.
okay. How many police officers are expected to retire in the next year? And I'm asking this with regard to the police officer overfill position. And I read the justification, which I found pretty compelling and concerning. So I just wanted to know what is the situation in terms of expected retirements?
Introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. Brian Frudenthal, your chief of police. So we are losing, we have one for sure that is retiring. That'll be retiring at the end of the summer. We have probably 4 that will be eligible to retire, but we don't foresee any plans of them retiring here in the near future. We have a couple that are in our deferred retirement we have 1 in it currently, I'm sorry, 2 in it currently, and another one that'll be joining it, which typically is a 5-year program that they can join and stay on for another 5 years.
So while getting the police officer overfill position would have been ideal, is it fair to say you don't feel that not getting that position filled is it's not putting you at great risk? So,
and one of the discussions we had, and we'll continue to have, is I'm sorry, when I said one, there's actually 2 retiring. One of them is a grant-funded position. That's a school resource officer at MVP. That one, we had talked about and had discussions, but it's grant-funded, but we had discussions about using that as the overfill position. I have not filled that position yet, and those are discussions we'll have, whether we're able to do that or not. And the agreement would be that it would be a recruit officer that we bring on. It's a fresh officer that would go to the academy and train up. So it wouldn't be a big expense, the biggest expense. It wouldn't be a lateral that we would be taking on all those other liabilities with.
okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
My other question is a broader question, probably for Ms. Lennon and Mr. Cifuentes. When I was looking at the 4 positions that are not going to be filled, a lot of them have to do with regulatory compliance and certifications. So would it be possible to have a position that would address the records management policy and compliance, the OSHA safety compliance, the ISO accreditation, one FTE that could work across departments to address all those, instead of having 3 positions?
Ms. Lennon, can you go back 1 slide so we can see that, please? Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I will say that it's hard to go across departments. I will say that. I mean, I am not for adding positions at the present time. I think our staffing level is pretty good for our city of our size and our revenues that we currently have. But really having a regulatory person that is dealing with every department would be very hard, because there's so many different regulations and different things going on in each department, that it would be hard to be that person that had to learn about. That would be a very difficult shoe to fill.
I just asked because I
Yes.
used to do a similar role in the company I worked in, and I had to work across numerous disciplines, and yes, it was hard.
Yes.
But in terms of trying to address the outages, the positions that are not being filled, it was just a thought that I had.
I would strongly echo what Ms. Lennon said. The ratio of the number of employees we have to population is very high. Our folks work hard, but we have a lot of employees. The other side of it, and Kirsten will cover it here in a little bit, is, the proposed compensation study and increase to compensation is going to cost us an additional $1.5 million every single year going up annually. We just couldn't afford to add any additional positions. I think I've told council, I've told staff, I've asked folks, if you could have another coworker or a raise, what would you choose? And at least a dozen of them have all said, I would take the additional compensation. And that's just where we are on some of this stuff. We just don't have the capacity right now, when you look at the balanced budget we're presenting, to add the additional positions.
Okay.
I think it's also important to note that you're taking an active role in looking at employees, what their job duties are. Are we getting our money's worth out of every employee? Which is important, because I don't think everybody understands that, and not every city manager does that. Some just say, hey, the position exists, so it is. But I think it's important that we recognize that you are making sure that, I guess, we're getting our bang for our buck for our employees.
And I think you folks have heard me say about our employees that, they consistently punch above their weight class. We don't have the luxury of having supervisors that just supervise our managers. We have working directors and working managers. And that's just how we operate. And so our capacity tends to be pretty wide. And because of that, I think, we have generally, the public is very pleased with the services that we provide. We've had some comments that come in on social media, and we respond to all of those. We've been urging people to utilize the report a problem on the website, because folks will, do it on social media. We don't necessarily monitor that all the time, and so we've been trying to get folks to do that. And when folks report a problem, it comes to us. It goes to several departments. They come to me as well, and we make sure that they get responded to. And in every single instance, we've had the public be very appreciative and continue to say and kind of laud the wonderful work that we do for the community. And so I don't, there's always going to be a desire for more employees, and you get, obviously on the public safety side, that's a little different than the rest, but on the rest of it, I think we have a very capable crew that's handling things, and again, I would love to be able to just add employees, but at some point, that also goes hat in hand with when we start talking about revenues and cost recovery, and additional employees ultimately will result in a need for more income from the organization.
Well, I know that you really stated from the outset, when you were coming through the door, that based on our population, you had questions about, the sheer number of employees that the city has. And an initial thought was that, no, we're not going to, come in and start cutting people off, but some positions may not be filled in order to cut back expenses that can reasonably be taken care of by existing employees.
When I got here, we created a personnel requisition form that each person, when you have a vacancy, you have to fill it out. Is it budgeted? What was there a separation? And what are the consequences if those positions are not filled? And those go through the director, through the HR director, and to myself, and we take a look at those. We've approved the vast majority of those because the justification is there, but it's still worth looking at each and every opportunity to save the taxpayers money, and so we want to make sure that we're providing the most efficient service that we can.
Well, let me make sure I have the math right here. Our general fund 26-27 budget for compensation is $22.5 million, right?
Yes.
And our general fund revenues budgeted for 26-27 is like 45 million? Is that?
The revenues are, 45.
So
it's like half,
compensation's half the budget.
yes. But we are a service-based
Yeah.
industry. I think that we try very hard to make sure that our employees are compensated correctly, and that we are providing quality benefits, and that they all hopefully appreciate that's, part of the budget discussions. Even when we were discussing the comp study, and I was telling them all things aren't looking good, and I was like being my negative self about money. And we still wanted to make sure that we, realize that they deserve to be compensated, and they work hard. And so they are a priority. And again, they should be the priority over adding new positions.
And related to that, it's not lost on us that in the municipal sector, I mean, John and I had that conversation at lunch today, we're all in a war for talent. And it makes more sense to compensate our employees at the appropriate level that they want to stay and continue to work for us and create a culture of an organization that they want to be a part of, so we don't lose money and have to retrain employees and bring less trained employees on. That's one of the reasons why we're recommending putting into effect a longevity program, so that those employees with significant years of service to the organization can be recognized for that longevity, and that serves as a recruitment tool and a retention tool.
Yes, I feel like our employees here are our city's greatest asset. So, I want to see that they're well taken care of. Yes.
Thank you.
Well,
We think
I agree.
we're the greatest asset, too.
I agree, but it is also important, and I think, and I give, Mrs. Cifuentes, credit to make sure that we're right-sized. I don't know, 50% of the general fund budget, I don't know how that compares to other municipalities our size. 50% doesn't surprise me, by the way. It's, personnel is always, you go anywhere, personnel's usually the highest cost. And the percentage of the general fund does not reflect the quality of the people we have. It's just, it's the reality.
Well, I think there's a bigger part of, we're Cottonwood, we're full service. We take care of the rest of eastern Yavapai County, which
Right.
equates to some of these things. So-
Right, we're taking care of, the Verde Valley and eastern Yavapai.
Yeah, and the services are indispensable ones. It's not like, oh, well, we'll just do away with it. We don't need that department over there. The services that these funds provide are indispensable for the quality of life in the city. So, yeah, our employees have to be adequately compensated, or they won't be here anymore.
Yeah, I guess when you say municipality this size, that's a little misleading, because it's really the service area that really is the more accurate description. As the service area is more than twice the size of the city, population. So for this, just so I understand this, working out the numbers, and I'm going forward one slide also. So that 253.8, that's the
Full-
number of positions, or those are the number of, well, not a .8 human being, but,
That's the number of positions, full-time
Positions.
equivalents. So
Okay.
we have in our budget, with the additional, if we add those grant-funded positions, with those positions in this next year, we will have a total of 253.8, and the .8 is the judge. She is only 80% the city of Cottonwood. Clarkdale pays for 20% of her time and her salary to do the Clarkdale court.
so that's the addition of 6.
Yes, this is adding
Or dependent upon grant
Yes.
funding, minus the
minus the
eliminated position.
attorney, yes.
Okay. And that cost of living adjustment, it says 0 there, it's because
It is.
we just don't know the number yet. Is
No,
that right? Or just-
we are not going to do a COLA this next year. Instead, we are going to implement the compensation study.
Got it.
Which, the compensation study will raise people's ranges and move them around. And then we are also doing a longevity. So as part of that compensation study, wherever they get moved in their new range, we're making sure that they should be at the right level in that range for how many years that they've worked for the city. And it's all percentage-based. And between the two, the 2080, on your review, annual review, if you have a passing evaluation, you get an increase of $2,080 annually. And that compensation study, The total is about 1.4 million added to the budget.
What's the difference between the cost of living adjustment and the Social Security COLA?
So we, in the past, have based our COLA, our cost of living adjustment on what the Social Security had planned for the
Okay.
prior year, or
Okay.
for that year. And I just have kept this spreadsheet, and it's there.
I just want to make
I
sure
like
we're on the
numbers.
same page, because I know a couple years ago, well, in the past, we've done comp studies every 5, 10 years, and now we're doing them consistently every couple of years, right? So
We are trying, yes.
so when we do a comp study, we're not seeing like a 20% increase, we're seeing
Yes.
small increases.
Yeah. The majority of the funding for that comp study is actually the longevity piece of it, not that people are so far out of their ranges.
Perfect.
Oh, my favorite topic. TPT. So this is a chart that shows the last 10, 11 years. You can see that in 2019, we had a spike, which would be the second column down. And that was due to us raising the sales tax from 3 to 3.5%. So of course, we had a small increase that year. And then the following 2 years, and then there was the COVID year that was crazy, that no one anticipated. People wanted to get outdoors, and we were an outdoor area. So a lot of people came up here, and our sales tax went up quite a bit. And so we had a few good years of 11, 17, 12%, and then we kind of leveled back out to our 4.5%. On average, we're about a 3.5% increase every year, except for this year, I'm anticipating we're going to be down. We are currently 0.9% down as of the last poll from the revenue, which would have been for March's sales tax. And I'm anticipating we're going to be down about 1.5%. And then I am always err on the side of caution, and I'm anticipating we might be down about 0.5% next year. I would much rather budget that we are lower than we bring in than budget above and spend money that we don't have. So that is where I've estimated, and you've heard me say a few times this year that sales tax is down. It's slowed quite a bit.
I don't want to get ahead of you, but is there a breakdown of this, what sales tax is? Okay.
You got ahead of me. So, 59% of our sales tax is retail. That would be, Walmart, Home Depot, all the retail shops. It's car sales. That's furniture stores. That's, all the type of retail sales. Usually about 17 to 18% is food for home consumption. And then the rest is very small percentages. And I will say on this slide, you'll see I'm trying to compare March to March, so you can see where we were. Really the thing that is down the most is retail. It's down by 4%. So it really has a big effect on everything else. Construction's up, but construction is very fickle. It kind of goes up and down depending on what's happening in the area and, who's building what. And so it's not a very accurate thing to look at. And then, of course, in January of 2025, the state eliminated the residential rental tax. So that's zero for this year because they eliminated that tax completely, which could be partially why it's down, too. We have to account for that reduction of that tax that we were charging. The additional bed tax is the bed tax that's supposed to, a portion go towards tourism and economic development. There's two taxes. There's the sales tax, and then there's the additional bed tax that get charged on each transient lodging or lodging that's under 29 days and under. And so that, I only list the additional one, which is the portion that portion of that needs to be used
How much
for.
is that portion? What's the,
Of the 3.5%, 1.5% needs to be used for tourism and marketing, right? Remember, that was the conversation we've had several times. Because 2% is kind of a given. They say you could raise it to 2%, and anything above the 2% should go towards tourism and marketing and economic development.
I just learned this last week that we have a advertisement tax, or I was told that we have an advertisement tax.
It's probably in the amusement and other category. It's very little.
Very little. Do we know what that percentage is?
I can get that for you. I don't have it right here off the top of my head, but I can find that out and bring it back.
Okay, thanks.
My other favorite topic, state shared revenue. This is the last 10 years. The projected numbers for 27 are what the state tells us they think they're going to allocate. And they base that off of what their revenue projections are. They say, we think we're going to bring in this much money and this, and then all of the amounts are based on our population. You get a percentage of that tax based on your population. For 27, state shared sales tax is down slightly, and then urban revenue sharing is down, is up a little bit, and then the MVLU tax, which is your motor vehicle license tax. So every time somebody registers their vehicle, they pay a license tax. It's up slightly, and then the HERF funds, which are highway user revenue funds, they are up just by about $16,000. You have to use highway user revenue funds for streets and streets projects. You cannot use it for anything else. So that all gets allocated to the HERF fund. And then the other three are part of the general fund revenues. As we all know, the state hasn't passed a budget yet. They're arguing over the budget at the moment. And if they do tax conformity, which is part of the budget, that could reduce our portion of the sales tax that we bring in for the urban revenue share, because urban revenue share is income tax. And these numbers of what they tell us are from 2 years ago, so it's what they collected 2 years ago, and then we get that. So in 2 years, we would really feel the effects of that conformity. It wouldn't be this next year right away. And as always, the state is always trying to limit what the cities and towns can tax. There have been several bills brought forward to try to change, get rid of the food tax. What was the other one they were just trying to get rid of? Oh yeah, that we can't raise our rates. Any rates. So, okay. So there are other revenues in the general fund, obviously, because sales tax is only about 25 million. You got about 15 million in other revenues. Some of it's intergovernmental, and what is intergovernmental? That's the state shared revenues, and then some of that is grant funding. If we received any grant funding in the budget, that's where it would go, is in the intergovernmental. We do have charges for services at various locations, the rec center, those types of things. Franchise and utility tax, interest. We have interest on some of our investments. With interest rates going up, the last few years have been pretty nice. but now interest rates have dropped down a little bit, so it's nice for people when they're borrowing money if the interest rates go down, but your investments don't bring in as much interest, so we kind of enjoyed those few years of higher interest rates. And there's all sorts of random things in this $15 million for next year.
I don't know if I have a question as an observation. Charges for services is basically flat for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, including next year.
It's pretty standard.
And I think that's a reflection of, it's a reflection of the fees
Yes.
but I guess my statement is, I'll be very interested in seeing what the fee schedule, this master fee schedule looks like. Because I think there's an opportunity. 6 years where it's flat, I think, we got to make sure that we're charging
The right
reasonable
rates.
fees for the services we're providing.
Yes.
I agree with you to some extent, but I think we also need to make sure that there are some services that we shouldn't bump up because we need to take care of certain areas.
Yeah,
So
I don't want to call out specific fees.
Yeah,
now
yeah.
by
I
any
mean,
stretch of
things like,
imagination.
things that are like luxuries, yes, let's bump those up. Things that are not luxury items, we should
Yeah.
probably leave soon, in my opinion.
Yep.
Since this is just the general fund, the places that charge, there's very few places that are actually charging fees. That's why it's been pretty stagnant. This would be, community development fees. This would be business registration fees. This would be the rec center fees. So, there's not, that's why it's pretty stagnant, because none of those
Right.
fees have really changed until recently. We did change the community development fees, but most of those have been the same rate for a while. I added this, I don't know why it's here. It should be on a different slide later on, because this is special revenue funds and enterprise funds, so I'm going to skip it. And we'll come back to that tomorrow. Budgeted grants. So in fiscal year '26, we budgeted that we would receive $9.4 million in grants and then have $10.7 million in expenditures for the grants. And what it's looking like we will receive, because I can't, 100% say for sure because we have 2 months left, is that we will bring in about $5.8 million in grant funding and then $6.3 million in expenditures for grants. Most of that grant funding is definitely the transit program and then also airport CIP projects. We do have the money that we got for the Main Street, for the appropriation for the Main Street project of $1 million also in here.
Sorry, I'm not following. So what are the expenses associated with the grants? Are you talking like match funding, or what is that?
That's just the expenditure. Like anytime you get grant funding, you have to pay the expense for that funding. So even like when we get a grant for transit is a good one. So we spend about $3.6 million to operate the transit program, but we get $2.3 million in grant revenue from ADOT to cover those expenses. So that's just showing you that that's the match, basically. The difference is the match that we have to give.
Right, okay.
So for next year, the currently in the budget is about $13 million in grant expenditures and $10 million in revenues. And a large portion of those are the transit grant, the increased expense for if we add those employees. So it's budgeted that way, that we would be able to do that if we get that funding. And then there's quite a few airport grants. And Ryan and Heather have been working hard at trying to find other grants to apply for. So there's a couple in there that are budgeted currently that we're pretty sure might come to fruition by the end of the fiscal year. By department, here's the general fund budget. The total for the general fund is going to be $60,152,250. Last year's total budget was $72 million, and you'll see that the reason it is, partially the reason that it's so much lower is the transfers out in the budget for fiscal year 26. It was $20 million, and the transfers out for 27 are $6 million, so that's a $14 million difference. Staffing. Did you have a question?
That number for city council seems way high.
So the reserves are budgeted in council's budget,
Okay.
and that is why it is high. And that's, I think, what was it, $14 million that we budget I have budgeted as a reserve total. That's in council's budget. As you can see, really, council only spends about $400,000 a year, actual expenditures. So this is the chart that just kind of shows the changes in the positions by department. And then, as I stated earlier, I removed the city attorney position because we have such a great contractual attorney. We don't need an internal city attorney.
That's right.
And then we still have kept the deputy city manager, but there's no funding for it. So there's just no money budgeted to fully fill that position. And then we added the grant court security, and then the one officer that is hopefully grant funded. See, I have percentages somewhere in my notes.
Natural resources used to be
Tom,
right? And then it just
Mr. Whitmer used to be natural resources a long time ago, and instead we transferred him over, and it's been a long time. He has been the utilities director for many years. This is a much bigger chart that goes on forever and ever and ever. I just didn't think you needed like the last 20 years. I do have a note that says on average, our FTEs increased by about 3% per year. And then since 2022, we've added 25 employees. Oh, and I wanted to make the comment of why it's 174.3. I know that seems like a very strange number. It's because of the 0.8 for the judge, and then half of the public works director is under the general fund, and the other half is under streets. So again, this is the salaries for the general fund, broken out just to show you. So your 174.3 employees cost about $22.5 million of salary and employee-related benefits. You can kind of see it by department. And then on to capital. So this year we had about almost $7.5 million in requested capital for just the general fund. And of those requests in the budget currently is about $5 million. I do have the list on this page, but it's really small. And I don't know if, I wanted you to be able to see it and be able to ask questions about it and discuss it. And so that's why that is there, so we can kind of see the detail of what is happening. And it's too big to be on one slide, so it's 2 pages. I did have in the packet and in the information that you were sent, all of the justifications that were given for each request. And when putting capital in the budget, a lot of the theme in the allocation was, let's make sure we're maintaining, let's make sure we're upgrading our facilities, let's make sure that we are, doing any type of updates and maintenance that needs to be done. So that's a lot of the parks stuff that's in there, replacing vehicles, those types of things, to make sure that we are, maintaining our equipment and our buildings and infrastructure.
Excuse me, I do have a question, and that was the design and remodel of the Riverfront Council Chambers. That amount that was put in there, is that going to be held until we find out the design on the Spectrum buildings, or is that something we plan to go ahead with?
So the design and remodel of the council chambers is in the capital improvements budget,
Yes.
so it's not in the general fund. And we are carrying it over for next year, a dollar value to be able to look at starting that. I think we are kind of waiting to see what happens. We should have some information on what it looks like for the design build for the
Okay.
property purchased for the new city hall by the end of the year, Mario tells me.
Yes, and Mr. Hausman and I have kind of talked about it, and as we start to progress through the design build of the new city hall, there may be some economies of scale that can be achieved with what council directed to do here. Related to that, the first item, there was a request from the clerk for new recording equipment and that sort of thing here. That's not funded separately, but it's in the capital request for the remodel of this facility. So that will happen when the remodel happens.
So I guess I need to back up. So this is in capital requests rather than general fund expenditures for, explain that to me.
So the fiscal year 27 is the requested items. This is what each department head that is part of the general fund submitted to hopefully get to be added to the budget. What's in the budget is the side that says 2027 budgeted.
All right.
Anything in that column is actually in the current budget totals.
Okay.
So the 150 million that we have for the whole entire city budget, it includes those capital items that are on the budgeted side of the column.
All right. And I had one more, and this is probably for Mr. Whitmore, about the new well, Verde Santa Fe. I thought that well was finished. It's not, or,
We will be going over that more tomorrow,
oh, okay, very good.
but it's not quite finished. There's still some items, there's no power to it yet, right?
All right,
We're waiting for APS.
all right. Thank you.
So I have a number of questions, but I'm getting confused as to which budget it goes under.
Okay.
So maybe I'll just reserve my questions for when you're finished, and maybe we can do it that way.
Well, that's the last slide for the general fund. So I don't know if you want to move on and talk about, we can talk about the capital in all funds if you want. That's fine. That's not a problem. We got 30 minutes.
So I wanted to first congratulate you on doing the budget prioritization survey. I thought that was really helpful in terms of addressing the community's interest in transparency. So now it's up to us to translate their feedback into the budget. So number one for them was economic development, growth, and housing on the forced ranking that we asked them to do. So where in the budget are items relating to housing or economic development?
I'm like quickly going backwards. So we are once again budgeting $1 million as a reserve for housing and that development. We've been budgeting that the last 3 years in a row. And it's just a dollar value to be used to help with housing projects, or if we are doing like in the past where we've done loans to, help with the project on 7th Street and those types of things. It's available then to help with anything that might be housing related. Even though it's set as a reserve, it's there for housing and developing housing. And then there's also a small budget remaining from our down payment assistance program that was developed 5 years ago. And we had put $450,000 into that fund to help with down payment assistance for people purchasing homes in Cottonwood that were employees, and for people who weren't employees that could apply for assistance. And we've given out several.
And is there anything on economic development?
So economic development's whole budget would be for economic development, and they have specifically a budget for marketing. And I knew this would be a question. Budget. In their budget, under economic development, we have, I know, I'm whipping through. I'm just trying to find it.
I cannot believe you don't know what line.
Hey, I know numbers pretty good, but that's a lot.
Also, as she's looking for that, I'll take up some of that time. I think, Ms. Lennon mentioned last night that when folks respond to these surveys, things tend to be kind of generalized. I think the one thing that is important to note for the public is, unfortunately, the cities don't, create economic development themselves for jobs. You try to lure them here, and we don't build housing ourselves. Our job is to facilitate both of those. Through what she's going to show you on the economic development side, we facilitate economic development through the new funding of contract with Retail Strategies, through staff working now to develop an opportunity zone here, which is a very competitive thing, and staff has spent countless hours over the last couple months trying to work towards that process. I think those are the day-to-day expenses towards that they don't see. We have, all you have to do is drive around town and you see a significant number of housing projects that are underway. There will be even more that will be coming to council with general plan amendments and possible zone changes.
Right, I just want to make sure there's funding for the programs that you mentioned.
Absolutely.
So, okay, I don't need to know the exact number, Kirsten.
Okay. I found it.
Okay, you can tell me then.
So we, in economic development's budget, they have $476,000 budgeted for marketing and tourism.
Which I think is what we had this year, right? Okay.
It's a little lower than
A little
it
bit
was
lower.
this year, but after some discussions, there was some more put in the contractual services line, so it kind of balances out. The contractual services is for the retail strategies, so it was moved from one line to another.
Okay. Another question is F&E. So I was just looking at the various departments, and Parks and Rec has 840,000. Some departments have zero. So just can you explain that briefly?
For the,
Furnishings and equipment. So some departments have
Oh.
zero budgeted, and others
all of the capital items that are on the list get budgeted under furnishing and equipment in each department's budget. So if you look at that list, on here, you can see the 4,100, which is Parks and Rec. All those items in the budgeted line all total up to what's listed on the Parks and Rec's budget under furnishing and equipment.
all the
So that's why they have it, whereas there are other departments like finance, like the clerk's office, like administration, we're not getting any capital items. So there's nothing budgeted in that line.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. One of the points that was brought up earlier was our service area, and I did see where money from other entities like the town of Clarkdale and the city of Sedona are coming in for transit, but I didn't see that for the communications center, or, I mean, are we getting paid sufficiently for the services we're providing?
So the money that we get for the communications center is all lumped in the general fund under dispatching fees. And next year, let's go back to this budget. Next year, we have agreements with all of those other organizations, and they pay an annual amount. And every 2 years, I think now, we are evaluating those agreements and then doing a 2-year agreement. And I think next year is about 1.3 million, and that's all of the organizations that use the dispatch center as their 911 operations put together.
Okay.
So it's just not listed specifically under each organization. It's all put in the budget together.
Okay. In the general fund, there's a proposal to transition from the current council AV recording system to an in-house system. So my question is, when will the system be in place? Because it looked like there wasn't going to be any funding for the next fiscal year.
After some discussions, so since we're going to be remodeling this area, we elected to put that funding in with this remodel, not have it be a separate item all on its own in the budget.
Okay.
Since we're already doing this, we might as well have it be part of that process.
I had a number of Parks and Recreation things, and I don't know if I should do that since Mr. Teal's not here.
He's on the it's a school board
School
meeting,
board,
right?
he had a
school board meeting
that
he needed
had
to go to.
So we can, any of those, if you want to have that direct response, he'll be here tomorrow if we
Yes.
want to do that.
Do you want to do that tomorrow?
We can do those tomorrow. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever questions you have, absolutely, want to
Yeah.
make sure they're answered.
Okay. And street construction, is that being discussed tomorrow? Or is that
Yes.
tomorrow? Okay, all right. I think that was it. And if we can discuss the Parks and Rec stuff tomorrow, that would be good.
So I see we're looking at bringing our janitorial services in-house, which I think,
We discussed it, and we have 1 year left on our current custodial contract.
Oh.
And then we will look at going either out for an RFP or what that would look like during this next fiscal year.
okay, so that decision has not been made.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we looking at bringing anything else in-house or outsourcing, anything other than our city attorney?
Just our favorite city attorney.
Okay.
I
So
mean, we
it's
do
basically
have
janitorial
agreements
service.
for our prosecuting attorney. That's outsourced. We have an agreement for that. Trying to think what other things we have. Obviously, auditing services, we contract out for.
Right.
We do contract out for some inspection services for community development, plan review for community development. Those
So
are all
right
in the
now,
budget.
there's no, I guess that's up to each department head about bringing things in-house that
Yes.
are currently outsourced.
Yeah. And whether it's feasible or cost-effective to do
Right.
it either way.
Right.
Any more?
We don't have to actually sit here until 5
No,
o'clock.
we
I'm
don't.
just saying,
We don't.
if, we have more to do tomorrow.
Yes.
And if we're done with questions for today, and someone would like to move to adjourn,
I'm offended that you don't want to spend time with us.
I do. Just not looking at budget.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And I will second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.